So here it is, the Warhammer 40,000 Big FAQ1. It has finally hit the webways. Posted by GW on the 16th of April 2018. Slightly later than its intended release for March. Mainly due to the Adepticon event. Games Workshop did indicate and advise that they are going to delay the FAQ just to review the results of Adepticon and what some of the observer comments and player comments have been from that event. So that was one of the major instigators in terms of why this FAQ was delayed. But here it is, it's finally here. Hi, my name is Alex and welcome to Garage Gamers Down Under. In this production we are going to have a brief overview and some initial thoughts with regards to the big FAQ by Games Workshop with respect to Warhammer 40,000. Before we get into the whole review, please subscribe to our channel. We'd love to see you subscribing. Click on the subscribe button below, and also don't forget to click on the bell icon. That way any new productions that are going to be released on this channel will pop up in your feed and you'll be notified by it. We hope you like this presentation. We would love to see your comments down below. If you have any thoughts or feelings about this FAQ, please make them known. Happy to discuss, answer any questions that you may have. So let's get into it. So what we're going to actually take a look at first here is the Warhammer community page, Warhammer 40,000 Big FAQ1, the lowdown. Posted on 16th of April 2018, so this is just less than 24 hours ago that this video is being made for you. So what we're going to go through down first is the FAQ errata and schedule. So what you can see there very quickly is that GW crossed out March. This was the actually intended release period for the big FAQ1. Obviously it appeared in April. It was posted on 16th of April, so about 3 weeks later than intended, although if it was going to be in the middle of March we're probably looking at about almost a month. So released in April, it happened because of some of the feedback and opinions that have been provided at Adepticon. So GW had actually elected to gather all of that information and put all of that together before they announced the FAQ, and obviously they want to take a look at if any of that was going to make an impact in terms of their intended changes that they had prepared already. So that's, to me, is a rational choice, a reasonable choice. Some have had some have posted negative opinions with respect to that because you know, they want to hold GW to the fire and let them know that you did say March, so why aren't you releasing in March? But I think this is really a reasonable choice decision that they've actually made. The only thing that I could probably say here that could be a point of concern is that with regards to the FAQ2, which is in September, it only leaves us with 1, 2, 3, 4 months before that FAQ drops. So I'm not sure really what's going to be happening in that FAQ2, because it's a really small period of time in terms of further playtesting, further observations and feedback from the community. You will note that there are some suggested changes that they want players to look at adopting, but definitely is not something that is an errata or an immediate effect. So that's probably something that's going to be happening in these 4 months before the FAQ2 drops. Don't be surprised if the September date moves to October. That could be a possibility, because now we've already got a precedent that's occurred with April date being the release date for the current FAQ. Okay, so let's get into the meat of it. As you can see here, I am on the Warhammer community webpage. You can all certainly access this webpage yourselves and see what GW have released and what's come out with the FAQ. So I will scroll down. You have a bit of a synopsis here in terms of some of the key elements, the new official match play rules, the FAQs and the errata. With regards to the FAQs themselves, if you go onto the FAQ page, you will see that the big FAQ here is prominent. It's the first one you will note. You will also notice that the codexes, the FAQs for the codexes, have also been updated. Tau, being a recent codex, has got its first FAQ. Necrons also have their first FAQ, but the other codexes that have been out, the other factions that have been out for a while, have also been updated. So you can see everything was updated across the board on the 16th of April 2018. I'm not going to get into any great detail with regards to these factions. My primary focus is to give you a bit of a review and some feedback and opinions with regards to the main elements of the FAQ release. So we've got new organized event guidelines, and we also have the new beta rules, the new proposed beta rules. So the current beta rules that have been in play have been actually converted into the FAQ and have been made official, and GW have proposed some new beta rules for the players, so we'll get into that as well. So let's take a look at the match play rules. Okay, so one of the key elements here is with regards to Psykers, the Grey Knights and the Thousand Suns. So with regards to Psykers, one of the key elements of contention has been that smite, the ability to use so many units on the board to smite your opponent in the psychic phase and really get away with quite a lot of damage to your units before those units actually then get into the shooting phase and also the charge and combat phase. There's effectively three phases there that you as an opponent could look at and see your units being demolished before you could actually even provide a response. So there's been a change to the Psykers, and also there's a key note with regards to Grey Knights and Thousand Suns. So first of all, the smite rules and the smite changes will not affect Grey Knights and Thousand Suns. That is pretty much key here. So with regards to those smite rules, they will not affect Grey Knights and Thousand Suns. So what we have here is a psychic focus. And what that means is that with the exception of Smite, each psychic power can be attempted only once per turn rather than once per Psyker per turn. We've already known that, that's pretty much standard. In addition, unless the Psyker attempting to manifest Smite has either the Brotherhood of Psykers, see Codex Grey Knights, or Brotherhood of Sorcerers ability, you must add 1 to the warp charge value of Smite for each attempt, whether successful or not, that has been made to manifest Smite during a given psychic phase, to a maximum warp charge value of 11. So what that essentially means is that to cast Smite, what you need is to pass on a 5. So 5 is the value that's actually needed to have Smite go off. With these changes, what that basically means is that every subsequent unit that you're going to be using to charge Smite, you need to add 1 to that value. So you choose your first unit. Let's say it's an Orc Psyker. You need to pass on a 5. You roll your 2 dice, you get a 6. You pass. That's Orc Psyker will pass. Will cast a smite and do D3 mortal wounds on the target unit. So you select your next unit to cast smite. You need to add 1 to the warp value. So all of a sudden you need to pass on a 6, and so forth. So if you have, let's say, for an example, 8 units that are Psykers, and you want to use all of those 8 to cast Smite at a particular point in time, your first one will be passing on a 5, the next one on a 6, next one on a 7, so on, up to the warp charge value of 11. You do not add more, add 1 more once you get to that point. With the exception of Grey Knights and Thousand Suns, that does not apply to them, so all the Psykers in those factions will always be passing on a 5 as it applies to the Smite rule. This was in the beta. It's been play tested. Hasn't been really used much in our group and in our meta. However, the feelings and opinions with regards to this is that it is a good decision, a rational decision to limit the impact of the smite ability for those heavily psychic focused factions. I think it certainly has a huge impact, or has had a huge impact for those players who have built their lists to get themselves to go first turn, because then what happens in that stage is you move forward as far and fast as possible, start casting your smites, so you're incurring quite a bit of damage that's generally cannot be saved, and then you're getting into your shooting phase, charge phase, melee phase, if you can actually cause some damage there. So effectively you could be doing quite a lot of damage to an opponent's units before that opponent even gets their first turn. So this is probably a good move by GW. I think there will be some murmuring and salty tears, I guess. I do feel a little bit for the Chaos Demons. The horrors will definitely be impacted heavily by this, because they only can use a single die to roll for smite and pass on the 5+. So if you have several horror units that you're running within your faction, within your Battleforged army, then all of a sudden what that means is that your third, fourth, fifth and so forth horror unit will not be able to cast smite at all, because the value will be increasing by 1. Once you actually get to your third unit, you'll be needing a 7. You really can't do that on a single die roll. So that's going to be a bit of an effect and a bit of a nerf, for lack of a better word, for Chaos Demons. They're hit a little bit hard there, and I guess the Chaos Demon players will be feeling a little bit hard done from that point of view. Okay, so let's keep on going. So GW did acknowledge here that the rule change with regards to Thousand Suns and Grey Knights has been introduced based on a lot of feedback from the players who play those factions, and have pointed out that escalating Smort's warp charge requirement can and could hurt their armies disproportionately, because those armies are psychic focused, and this is where I guess they shine in that particular phase. But as I said earlier on, I think the Chaos Demons got a bit of a hit, a bit of a heavy hit on this one, so there might be some salty tears on that. Okay, so moving along, we've got the targeting characters rule. So this was a beta rule that has now converted into official rules under this FAQ. So, as everyone should be aware, that the original targeting characters rule was that an enemy character with a wounds characteristic of less than 10 can only be chosen as a target in the shooting phase if it is both visible to the firing model and it is the closest enemy model to the firing model. This means that if any other enemy model is closer, whether it is visible or not, then the enemy character cannot be targeted. And then what we have is the new targeting character rule that has been rolled over from the beta, unchanged. An enemy character with a wounds characteristic of less than 10 can only be chosen as a target in the shooting phase if it is both visible to the firing model and it is the closest enemy unit to the firing model. Ignore other enemy characters with a wounds characteristic of less than 10 when determining if the target is the closest enemy unit to the firing model. So characters cannot block other characters. So a character with a wound characteristic of less than 10 cannot block other characters that are sitting behind that character from being targeted. So you can essentially ignore that character that's closer to you and target another character behind it that has a wound characteristic less than 10. So changes the meta around a little bit in terms of how you play on the board. I think it's a sensible and reasonable rule change. Characters are protected in this game, but certainly that protection shouldn't be infinite for them. So there should be finite protections for those characters, and I think this is a reasonable change by GW based on the feedback received. So obviously rolled over from a beta into an official rule. Okay, so moving on to the FAQs and the errata itself. As I mentioned earlier on, you can see your FAQs in the Warhammer community page. any factions that are of interest to you, you can actually download the PDFs. One of the big PDFs here will be the big FAQ itself. I'm sure there's going to be quite a lot of interest with that one. Some of the key points with regards to the FAQ and the errata is that we get more command points. So the detachment command benefits have changed and are going to be applicable to the battalion detachment and the brigade detachment. So now if you choose the battalion detachment in a Battleforged unit, you will get 5 command points instead of the 3 command points that originally you would have received. And if you choose a brigade detachment for your Battleforged army, you will get 12 command points on top instead of the 9 command points that were there. Just remember as well is that being a Battleforged army, you automatically will receive 3 command points before these command points are actually applied. So for example, if you choose a brigade detachment in your 2000 point list, you will get 12 command points, and the fact that your faction is Battleforged, or the units that you've selected with the detachments are all Battleforged and meet those prerequisites, you'll get an extra 12 command points. So that means you're starting off with 15 command points. I feel that what's happening here is that GW are recognizing that the stratagems are not being used as much as they would probably prefer and like, and possibly the players themselves are finding that from turn to turn, they've got some diminishing returns with regards to the command points that they have available to farm to apply their stratagems. So it means that you will be able to use stratagems a little bit more freely. You probably won't be so restrictive in terms of the spending of your command points. Especially, obviously, if you're using a brigade attachment, you'll have 15 command points to use, so you can burn through your stratagems a little bit faster, and probably without much worry, as you would have some command points to spare, hopefully. What I find is that I do burn through my command points in my first 2-3 turns, and they're probably the most critical ones, because if you're not winning after turn 3, then you're going to be possibly losing at that point in time. So I think this is a really good change. +5 command points for a battalion detachment, brigade detachment getting 12. If you're astute enough, you could certainly build a 2000 point army with 3 battalions, so that would mean 15 command points. On top of that, another 3 command points that you would get by being Battleforged, so you're looking at 18 CPs to burn through. That means then that's looking at your stratagem cards, the ones that you would put aside and would not use, you might actually be starting to use those ones as well, and not just focus on the most critical ones that you like. You might be able to use some other ones as well. This certainly looks like GW is promoting the use of the stratagems, getting some more command points onto the board for each player. So a positive step indeed. I think this is really a positive step. Ignoring wounds. So this is something that I haven't actually seen coming. I haven't actually seen much talk about this one, but I certainly get the rationale behind it. So now, no longer can you roll so many times to ignore the wounds, and some of the stuff that was the biggest concern to Games Workshop is the fact that you know, the old feel no pain approach, and under these new rules where certain players with factions that have certain abilities and spells cast, etc., could have several bites at the cherry to ignore those wounds. So you might have a 5+ save and then a 6+ save from another ability, so you would roll that 5+, and anything that passed survives, anything that failed you roll again from that other ability, and you need a 6+ on that. So that's several bites of the cherry to actually get those those models saved, and I guess that caused some consternation and concern out there that there's just too much of that going on, and that gamers are gaming the system to use that to their advantage. And I guess the intention is for that not to occur. That wasn't the initial intention when creating the 8th edition rules. So I guess this is an indication by GW that that's not what they wanted players to be doing, and they've made a change in that. As I said, I haven't actually heard any grumblings about this or comments about this in our groups in the area that I play. But I guess it must have been out there somewhere, and I think that's also a reasonable and rational change by Games Workshop. Finally, there's been a review on points as well. I'm not going to get into the points themselves. You can certainly find that in your respective faction codex FAQ. Some of the key ones is that Guilliman, for instance, has increased to 400 points. So I guess there's been a recognition in terms of his power and ability on the board, so the cost of using him has increased. Mortarion and Magnus have also increased. I've also noted that Hive Tyrants with wings have also increased. They're costing 190 points now, so if you want to use them, you have to pay the points for them. It's simple as that. This is the new guidelines for events. So what they're proposing here is that tournament organisers, event organisers have a bit of a consideration with regards to their rules and apply this one here as well. And in short, it's called the Datasheet Rule of 3. What they're proposing is that for organised events, most of them that I have attended and go to and look at are at the 2,000 point level, so I'll focus on that. So for 2,000 points, what they're saying is that obviously you have up to 3 detachments per army. That hasn't changed, but what they've added here is another column, and that is the number of times each data sheet can be included. It is annotated, and what they want to ensure that people understand as well is that this rule does not apply to units with the troops or the dedicated transport battlefield role, nor does it apply to any units that are added to your army during the battle that cost reinforcement points. So, number of times each data sheet can be included, up to 3 per army if you're playing in a 2,000 point game. Where did this come from? Did it come from Adepticon? Possible. One could assume that occurred, or from other sources. One thing I will point out is that in the Tau Codex that was just released not long ago, there is a section which states that for match play, only 1 commander can be taken per detachment. So what that meant is that Tau players couldn't command a spam anymore. As you can only take 1 commander per detachment, and if you only can have 3 detachments in a 2,000 point game, obviously that means that you can only have 3 commanders. This does not apply to other characters in that faction, like Cadre Fireblades, etc. However, this change would apply to that as well. And I get the feeling that this is a way that they've transformed that rule to make it global. So, as I mentioned before, there was quite a bit of heat put on by the Tau players that all of a sudden they found that their faction and their match play rules have restricted them in terms of how many commanders that they can take per detachment. Whereas nothing like that has occurred to the other factions. Hive Tyrants come to mind, Demon Princes come to mind, so those factions and the players could actually spam Hive Tyrants and Demon Princes as much as they like, as long as they fit the parameters of the number of detachments and the detachment rules themselves. This certainly changes that. My thing with regards to this is that GW is suggesting this rule for organised events. I think and feel that they should have actually applied this in the match play section. This is something that should be across the board, not just for organized events, but should be a standard rule across the board. It eliminates that whole argument about Tau commanders being nerfed, for instance, and other factions not actually having that rule. And one of my other, I guess, reasons for this is that as a player, when you're turning up to your Games Workshop store or your friendly local gaming group and you are looking for a game, you're going to be meeting up against a player that you may have not played before. You don't know what list he's actually bringing. At least before that game begins, you would know that your opposing player is limited in terms of the number of times each data sheet can be used. So you know your opponent cannot have more than 3 Hive Tyrants or more than 3 Demon Princes, and that applies to you as well. So by saying that this is only suggested for organized events, it excludes that element out of it. So you can still be turning up to a store with your 2,000 point list looking for a match play game and come up against someone who is spamming Hive Tyrants, Demon Princes. So that's probably something where I think they've missed a little bit, and I would strongly suggest that they reconsider and put this as a standard rule for match play. Okay, so moving along, we've now got Games Workshop suggestions for the future. So this is the new match play beta rules that they want to suggest to the community. They want the community to test that out and provide feedback. So something that's been talked about for quite some time in the last 6 months at least is the soup. So what does soup mean? Well, soup is where players actually grab units from different codexes and mash them up into their army and still keep the battle forged, or still meet the battle forged requirements. So what they're suggesting here is that soup should be off the menu, and that's been talked quite a lot by the gaming community, and I think the gaming community will certainly receive this well and want this to be applied. So I think this definitely in September will be converted into an actual rule. It won't be a beta rule. I think this will get the green lights by the community and move across into being an official rule. So what they've called, it's called the Battle Brothers beta rule. What it says is that all of the units in each detachment in your Battleforged army must have at least one faction keyword in common. In addition, and keep note of this, that this keyword cannot be Chaos, Imperium, Eldari, Ynnari, or Tyranids. So unless the detachment in question is a fortification, unless the detachment in question is a fortification network, this has no effect on your army faction. So what they're saying here is that your faction keyword that is common across your data sheets cannot include Chaos, Imperium, Eldari, Ynnari, or Tyranids. So to be battle forged, you must ensure that at least one faction keyword is common across all those data sheets. That's how you're actually going to be deemed to be battle forged. However, you cannot choose Chaos, Imperium, Eldari, Ynnari, or Tyranids as that common faction keyword. So this will address and eliminate the soup. Once again, very positive move. I think this is really something well thought out by Games Workshop. Kudos to them. It's something that I think that come September will be converted into an official rule and will no longer be beta. I don't think this needs to be play tested in any way. I think this is really sound. Now the other beta rule is the first turn rule. I'm a little bit conflicted about this one. I'm not sure whether this is the pinnacle of the first turn rule, or fixing the first turn. There is quite a lot of contention with regards to that first turn, primarily focused on the fact that whichever player gets the first turn, more than often that individual will win the game. And I think there's some stats out there correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's somewhere around the 70% mark. So basically meaning that if you are a player and you get the first turn, 70% of the time you're actually going to win the game. So that kind of implies that strategy, tactics don't really matter in the game. What matters is you going first and then hammering your opponent, getting into those units and eliminating as many units as you can off the board before your opponent gets their first turn. So this is where I'm a little bit conflicted. I think everything else that they've done is really great, but the rules around first turn is something that I think they should still look at and work towards. Nevertheless, this is possibly a positive step. So what they're focusing on here is the units that can actually be set up in reserve. Whatever the fluff behind it is for your faction, what it essentially comes down to and boils down to is that that particular unit is going to be placed in reserve. And what people are doing with that, what players are doing with that, is setting units aside in reserve, some of their critical units, I guess, in reserve. So if they don't get the first turn, they want to avoid obviously being hit. However, if they get the first turn, all of a sudden they've got a number of units that they can deep strike, for lack of a better word. This is something that we used in good old 7th edition and earlier editions. So they can deep strike those units on the board if they get their first turn, and as long as they're more than 9 inches away from any enemy unit, it is legal. So all of a sudden those units that are deep striking can come and arrive somewhere other than their own deployment zone, so they can be arriving anywhere on the board. So is that strategy? Is that tactics? Yes, I guess that certainly is. It's certainly something that's been applied. So there is a bit of a change with regards to that. So what they're saying with these beta tactical reserves rule is that all those units that you have in reserve, when it's your first turn, you cannot set those units up anywhere on the board. Those units arriving in your first turn must arrive in your deployment zone. They cannot arrive anywhere else. So that's a bit of a approach to limit those units dropping so close to the opponent's units and then starting to obviously eradicate them. So it will change things a little bit. As I said earlier on, I don't think it goes all the way, but it certainly is a move in the positive direction with regards to that issue about taking the first turn. The other element here as well is that when you're deploying, in terms of how many units are in reserve as opposed to how many units are actually on the board, has a bit of an impact as well. Traditionally, under the previous rules, is that half of your units need to be on the board when you deploy, and the other half can be in reserve. So let's say you have 10 units in your faction, 5 can be in reserve and 5 need to be deployed on the board, even though let's say all 10 could actually have an ability or have a rule that allows them to be in reserve. What they're saying here is that in addition to that, the power level needs to be checked as well. So what they're saying is that the combined power ratings of all the units you set up on the battlefield during deployment must be at least half of your army's total power level. So that's additional accounting that you certainly need to do. So let's say your power level is 100. What you need to do is to ensure that 50 points out of that power level need to be set up on the battlefield, and the other 50 can actually be in reserve. So a little bit of additional accounting for you to do. So you're not just tracking a unit count, you're also tracking power level, power ratings count as well. So a little bit of a change to that. I guess that can be impactful. It changes your strategy, certainly can change your tactics when you're actually deploying and seeing who you're coming up against. So that's a good thing. I always love those elements being brought into a game. Keeps you on your toes, keeps you thinking. That's always important. And also I must highlight as well that with regards to the rule about the player's first turn, where the units need to be deployed wholly within the controlling player's deployment zone, it applies to match play games. So it's not for narrative games, it's not for games where you're just getting together just to have a bit of fun and just get some models and units out onto the board and just roll dice. It's really for match play games. What's going to be important here as well is that you keep on measuring your deployment zone. So what usually people do is they lay down some dice to indicate their deployment zones, and then they clear those dice away before the first turn begins. This might be something that changes there as well, so you're going to be doing some bookkeeping, so to speak, where you may need to leave those dice on the board just to make sure that those measurements are still in place. There is a notation though here, is that this particular rule with regards to units arriving on the battlefield during the player's first turn, it does not apply to Genus Steel Cults units that is being set up according to the cult ambush ability, or to any units that are set up after the first battle round has begun but before the first turn begins, such as those set up via the forward operatives or strike from the shadows stratagem. It's applicable in the first turn. In the player's second, third turn, it's no longer applicable. So any units that you have in reserve, and it's your second turn or it's your third turn, you can now deploy those units anywhere in the battlefield as long as you are more than 9 inches away from the enemy unit. The rule with regards to the third battle round, that is that after the third battle round, if you have units still that you haven't deployed, those units are considered lost, have been destroyed. I think they could have probably just allowed to get that extended to the fourth battle round rather than keeping it on the third, considering the fact that in the first battle round people may not be deploying units. I think strategically and tactically it improves and changes the game a little bit, giving you some free form there as well in terms of when you're going to be deploying units. I think it would have been good to just extend that out to the fourth battle round, but keeping in the third is perfectly fine as well. It's not too bad. There is quite a lot of common occurrences where battles end by the end of the third turn, so that happens commonly as well. So not a huge impact, but I thought maybe they could have actually done a little bit there. As Games Workshop says, play the game, send us your feedback. Here you got the 40K FAQ feedback email address. It is 40kfaq@gwplc.com. So if you have any feedback to send to them, any feelings and observations from the games that you have had, certainly send all of that to their email address. I've certainly done that myself. A couple of times they've actually even responded, which has been really great to see. Most of the time they haven't, but I understand they're probably getting inundated with emails from around the world. There's a large volume coming through, so they can't answer every single one. So that should be understood and accepted by all. You shouldn't really expect to receive direct feedback. If there is a common thread, you will see in the FAQs for the codexes, for those factions, changes being made or comments or feedback being provided by the GW playtest team. So overall, I think this is a good move by Games Workshop. I mentioned some of the things that I think they could have done a little bit better. I think my biggest one would be that organized events table. I would have loved to see that applied across the board for match play, rather than just be focused only on organized events. I think the number of times each data sheet can be included rule should have been a rule across the board for match play. I think that's probably one thing that they've missed the ball on. Apart from that, I think everything else has been a positive change. I guess some individuals may feel aggrieved about some of the points that have been reviewed, but I think once again that there's been some good moves with regards to that. Smite going over from beta into the rules is certainly a big move, but a good choice and decision has been made with regards to exclusion of Thousand Sons and Grey Knights from that rule. I think they've really made a good move on that part. It shows that Games Workshop is listening to their players, not just the playtest team, so that's really good to see. As I said, overall I think this is really a good change. We've got about 4 months now to apply this, to play and see what the outcomes are, if it actually has any unintended consequences. So that's some of the things that you always have to look out for. There may be some unintended consequences and that may arise moving forward. However, in saying that, I think this is a really good FAQ by Games Workshop. It's good that they've actually held it back just to review what's actually transpired at Adepticon and get some more feedback and probably playtest a few things as well before they actually made any further decisions. Feel free to let us know what you think about the BIG FAQ 1 2018. Please leave your comments in the comments section down below. Let's start a discussion about this and see where it takes us. If you feel certainly aggrieved by some changes and what's occurred, please let us know. Or if you think that's something of key note should be looked at as well, and provide comments about that as well. All of the crew at Garage Gamers Down Under, thank you for watching this video. We hope that you found it insightful and informative. As mentioned, I just wanted to give you a bit of a quick review with regards to some key elements of the FAQ. There's certainly much more that you can read. Please go to the Games Workshop website, the Warhammer community website specifically. That's where you actually can find most of your information. If you go here, Warhammer 40,000, you will see the big FAQ there, being the first one to look at, and then you've got all the other codexes and the factions that have been updated as well. So feel free to go in there and take a look at what changes have transpired and occurred for you. Thank you for listening. Hope that you will subscribe to our channel. We are a new group that is in development. We've got some videos out already. We hope you enjoyed those videos. We're a bit more of a laid back player group. We would love to see more subscriptions because that will certainly drive us further in terms of the amount of videos we will be producing for you. Click on the like button if you like this presentation, because we'll be looking at doing some more reviews like this as well for you. The key element here and takeaway is to keep on enjoying your games, keep on having fun. That is what Warhammer 40,000 is really all about. Enjoy the games you play, enjoy the company you keep. Have fun, guys, and we'll see you next time.